Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief Series 2. I am delighted to be here with psychic and medical intuitive Julie Ryan today. Julie is an author, an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, and an inventor. So a lady who wears many hats. It's so wonderful to have you here, Julie.
Oh, Tara, what a delight to be with you. Thank you for including me.
Well, I love talking to psychics, mediums, medical intuitives. I find it absolutely fascinating. And I had my first reading probably in 2014 with a medium. And it definitely was very transformative for my grief. To know that my parents, it was really like having a conversation with my parents. It was just extraordinary. So I know that it can be a sensitive subject for some people who have been, raised thinking that this is a bad thing, if you like. And I know that you were raised as a Roman Catholic yourself. So it would be really interesting, I think, for the listeners to hear, how you became a medium and a psychic, first of all.
Well, as you mentioned, thanks for that lovely introduction. I am a businesswoman who learned how to do woo-woo. And I'm a buffet of psychicness is what I tell people. So I'm not one of those psychics who's had dead people chasing her since childhood, or if I did, I didn't know it, let alone what I would have done with that information. And being raised Catholic, and I think being raised Christian, and really in any religion or any culture, there are angels, there are elders, there are saints, there are deceased loved ones that we're taught. It's just in every culture and every religion that there are spirits. And I think that religions have tried to make it so that we can only get to those spirits through whoever the clergy person is or through that religion, which is crazy because we all have the ability and we all do it all day long, whether we realize it or not. And so along the lines of people, I live in the southeastern United States. They call it the buckle of the Bible Belt down here. And there are some fundamentalist religions, I would say, that would say, oh, that's the devil talking to you, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about that is spirit is pure love. And so if you're talking with spirit's only going to tell you good stuff to convey to the whomever you're in a conversation, with whom you're having a conversation. And interestingly enough, as far as the Catholics go, there was a papal bull, which is kind of like a bulletin or a newsletter that the Pope sent out. I believe it was in 2016, Tara, that talks about how he wants the current Pope Francis wants his pastors, requested that his pastors welcome psychics and mediums and healers because they're doing the work of the Holy Spirit. Now, when that's coming from the head shed at the Vatican, that has a lot of merit, but most people don't know about it. The other thing that's interesting is my books are given to every family that comes into my Catholic parish, a copy of my book when they come in to plan a funeral. And it's used in Bible study classes and also book club classes in churches and synagogues all across the US, which I find fascinating too. So I think that whole thing that it's evil is really starting to wane.
Yes, that's wonderful news. And that also for people who are skeptical as well, that maybe if they had a reading with somebody like yourself, then they would really change their minds about, thinking that, I know that some people would be like, oh, they're just charlatans. But they've never had a reading probably with somebody who, like yourself, who gives evidence.
Well, and I think the other thing too is I don't really work with people who don't believe in it or aren't at least open to it. I've had very few people through the years say, "Well, you have to convince me of this." And I say, "Well, really, I don't. If you want to talk to me about this, fine. If you want to talk about the weather or the holidays or sports or whatever, that's fine too. It doesn't matter to me. If you want to talk to me about it, that's fine." And I had somebody call into my show. I do a weekly show. It's called Ask Julie Ryan, Tara. And people call in and they ask Julie Ryan, and then we ask Spirit, and it's all across the board. Love life, career, health, my pet, can we talk to my deceased, whomever? And this one woman called in and she wanted to talk to her deceased daughter who had died recently. And the daughter said, "Quit giving my kids so much candy." I said to my caller, I said, "Are you giving the kids candy?" And she said, "Oh yeah, they love it." So, we'll get something, to your point, evidential. We'll get something that will really resonate with them. And she was crying so hard when I first started talking to her when she first called in that it was kind of hard to understand her. And then when I told her that, boy, the mood lifted and she started laughing. So by the time that we were done chatting, she felt a lot better. And I think that's the service that we give when we talk to deceased loved ones.
Right. And to know that we can continue a relationship with our loved ones after they have left this earthly plane, that it doesn't have to be the end, that's
right.
I think what's so incredible about it.
Well, and it's all throughout literature. Visions of deceased loved ones coming in. There's university-based research that proves without a shadow of a doubt that life exists after bodily death, number one. And number two, that at the end of life, close to 90% of hospice patients report seeing their deceased loved ones and visions of deceased pets, either in dreams or actual awake visions. And so you take that kind of information, and then there's all kinds of information that corroborates that. I love when science catches up with woo-woo, and that's what we're seeing.
We really, really are. It's a fascinating time that we're in. It's can be a difficult time, but it's also a really pivotal time on the planet. And I wanted to ask you about your book, Angelic Attendants, because, I've always been asking myself since I was very young, where do we go when we die? I was always really kind of obsessed about that question, and always kind of surprised that more people weren't thinking along those lines. And you are very sure about what's next for us. Would you share about that?
Certainly. When we're dying, all of us, whether we die in the case of something very suddenly like a suicide or a homicide, or whether we die over days, weeks, months, even years, we're all surrounded, Tara, by angels and deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets. And they take on different configurations as the person is getting closer and closer to death. And I call that the 12 phases of transition. So angels surround the person who's dying. Let's say somebody's in a bed, in a hospital bed. They surround in a circle, and then they open up into a horseshoe and eventually a straight line across the foot of the bed. And the most recently deceased, let's say the closest maternal person that's deceased, for instance, my mother's deceased. So if I was dying, it would be my maternal grandmother. Closest spirit on the maternal line is the one that comes in first and runs the show from the spirit world. Mm-hmm. So if my maternal grandmother was still alive, it would be her mother. It's always on the maternal line, mm-hmm. which I find fascinating. Furthermore, the closest paternal spirit comes in next, and that would be my father who's deceased, or if he was still alive, it would be my mother's father. Again, it's on the maternal line. If he was still alive, it would be his mother's father, his maternal grandfather. So it's really interesting how that all works. And I think that has to do with ancient Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, the Kabbalah section of Judaism, I guess, or Kabbalah, the line of thought of Kabbalah and the Kabbalah teachings in that, and really in all of Judaism, is that it's somebody is Jewish if their mother was Jewish. That's why we'll see people who are not Jewish that marry a Jewish man. If a woman marries a Jewish man and she's a Gentile, she oftentimes will convert to Judaism if they want to raise the children Jewish. Mm-hmm. And so there's something there because it's always the maternal line. And we think as mothers that we're done with our kids when they're grown and gone. And we're not. We're running things from the spirit world to help them transition, which is really sweet when we think about it. So the 12 phases of transition, there are illustrations on my website, AskJulieRyan.com, that anybody can go to, and you can see what the different phases look like to me. And that's what I talk about in Angelic Attendants, what really happens as we transition from this life into the next. And then there are many stories with families, about families that with whom I've worked, and they're very heartwarming and fun and just really poignant stories that I've been able to be a part of in a small way when a family's going through such a heartbreaking time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so assumably people can call on your radio show as well and ask you questions.
Right. Okay. And what I tell people is just ask the question, what phase of transition is my mom in? What phase of transition is Uncle Arthur in? Whomever. And you're going to get a number in your head from 1 to 12, but it'll come in as fast as you can snap your finger. And then refer to my website. And you'll see the illustrations and you'll see what they look like, how the angels are surrounding the person who's dying. And as they go through those phases, you can tell how close they're getting to death. Also, if your loved one is going through several phases fairly quickly, you want to get the family in to say goodbye if that's what your family does. Because a lot of people take time off work, they're traveling vast distances, and they want to be there when their loved one transitions. And so this really kind of gives us a little bit of a gauge of what's happening. And it comes in really handy. And I have a fun story about how this all came about.
Yeah, please.
If you'd like for me to share it. When my mother was dying in 2002, this is the first time I saw this. And I'd been studying the medical intuitive stuff and the psychic stuff for many years at that point, but I'd never been in the room when somebody was really dying and in their last hours or days of life. So I saw all of this transition happening. And there were a couple of times, Tara, where I thought, am I having a midlife crisis? Am I having a hot flash or something? What's going on with this? And there's lots of stories about my mother's transition in my book. But from that time at her funeral, which was a Catholic mass, they said this prayer called In Paradisum at the end. And it's said at every Roman Catholic funeral at the end. And most Anglican funerals too that I've attended, it's said there as well. And it talks about how the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. I thought, that's what I just saw, my mother, in less than 24 hour time period. Fast forward a few years, I had worked with several other families, friends, primarily some relatives. I could tell how close to death they were. I was using this 12 phases of transition that I had seen from my mother. And I was at my mentor's office, and she's been my mentor and friend for 30 years. I zap on people all over the world. She's the only one that zaps on me. So when she's doing a healing on me, Tara, my deceased loved ones line both sides. I'm on a massage table face up. Both sides are lined with my deceased loved ones' spirits. And one day, and her name's Susan, and she could see him too. So one day this spirit of a dead pope shows up. And I said, well, who are you? And he's got the Pope hat on and the whole 9 yards. And he said, well, I'm Clement. And I said, all right, I never heard of a Pope Clement. He laughed and he said, well, I was number 6. I said, okay, can I help you? And he said, yeah, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies, because it's been so bastardized throughout the ages. People are so afraid. And he said, you know the truth. You know what happens. It's, that's why you're here. And I laughed and I said, I'm not doing that. I'm a businesswoman. People are going to think I'm nuts. Right?
Yeah.
And he laughed and he said, yeah. Just get on with it. He said, everything you've done in business is to prepare you for this. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. So I leave Susan's office, Tara, and I'm in my car and I just did an internet search on Pope Clement VI. Well, come to find out, this guy was in office during the Black Plague, when 2/3 of Europe died. And he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I said to myself, Ryan, you cannot make this up. I never heard of a Pope Clement, let alone knew that he was in office during the Black Plague. Wow. So since that time, he's been my main spirit guide, and he prods me, and I laugh. I always say he treats me like a Nike ad, because I'll tell him why I can't do something, and he'll say, yeah, just go do it. Just do it. Like the Nike ad, just do it.
Just do it.
All right. And I do. And then it all boom, 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 boom. Everything unfolds, perfectly.
Amazing. And I think it's so wonderful for people who are afraid of death to hear this message. I was just thinking of the people who are in grief, and they might be thinking, well, okay, so my loved one is happy wherever they are, but that doesn't help me in this moment, because I still miss them so deeply, and I so wish that they had not left me. And how do you console people in that moment with your work?
Well, I think a couple of ways. What I was talking about earlier, the university-based research showing that spirits are still very much present around us. And oftentimes it takes somebody who is at the end of their life and they have one foot in the spirit world and one foot in our human reality. That's number one. Number two, back to that prayer said at the end of every Catholic and Anglican funeral in Paradisum. I believe people have seen this since the beginning of time. And when I was writing Angelic Attendants, Tara, I did some research to find out, where did that prayer originate? And I learned it began as a 5th century Gregorian chant. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it took till the 5th century till people were well enough educated, learned enough, if you will, that they could read and write. And certainly some of the most well-educated people at that time were men living in monasteries and synagogues. So people have been able to see this kind of thing since the beginning of time, I believe. And as we've become more well-educated, we want to be proof-based. We are proof-based. We want to see proof that this is happening. And that's where the scientific is catching up with it. So it gives my clients and my audience comfort knowing that we can communicate with them. We do see them. They do send us signs. So they are around. It's just they're in a different form. Mm-hmm. It's similar to when we were all in grammar school and we learned that water can be liquid. It can be a solid in ice. It can be kind of a semi-solid in snow, right? It can be steam. It's still water. It's just in a different form. And it's the same with this. The other thing is everybody can talk to their deceased loved ones. And I'm happy to teach them how.
Yeah. So you offer sort of courses to teach them?
I do, but right now I can teach everybody that's listening.
Oh, okay.
Really fast.
Yeah. Great.
Fast, fun, and free. How about that? 3F, fast, fun, and free. So all you have to do is, our heads are big satellite dishes, Tara. They receive and they transmit frequencies. Every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all of their lifetimes. All we have to do to communicate with them is think of them. They immediately come in. It's like we're tuning our car radio to the station that's broadcasting classic rock or the Beatles or whatever you want to listen to. So once we're connected with them, all we have to do is say something either aloud or in our heads and say, hey, hey, Mom, what kind of cookies do you want me to make for the kids that are coming over later today? What kind of cookies do you suggest I'm going to make? And you're going to get a thought. It's going to come in your head within a second. And she'll say chocolate chip or snickerdoodle or peanut butter or whatever. But it comes in within a second. Spirits answer, they communicate telepathically. When we think of something for more than a couple of seconds, that's our brain talking to us. Mm-hmm. Spirit's going to answer instantly. Couple of other caveats. Number one, Spirit's always going to give us the correct answer. How applicable the information they're conveying is going to be predicated on how we ask the question. Mm. For instance, if we say, hey, Mom, am I going to enjoy the movie? And you get a yes. And then you're watching some movie tonight on the television and you're thinking, this is awful. Mom, what's up with that? Well, the way you ask the question, am I going to enjoy the movie, could pertain to any movie that you watch throughout the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. What you want to say is, hey, Mom, am I going to enjoy watching Frozen 2 on Disney Plus tonight, sitting in my living room? You want to be as specific as you can. And then the information that you get is going to be applicable to what you're thinking of. Spirit doesn't read our mind. They send us thoughts. We can communicate with them, but they're not going to interfere with our lives.
Do you ever ask spirit, people in spirit, what they miss about like being in the human form?
I have many times.
Oh, could you share some of the things they miss? Yeah.
Food. They miss food. They miss food because they don't need food. So they can't, anything that they think of immediately materializes, but it's all an illusion. Mm. And that's what they teach us, that this is all an illusion that we're in. It's like we're actors playing a part in a play. We're following a script and we're creating the script as we go. There are things that we come in that we want to explore and experience, but we create it as we go. Our thoughts create our reality. So I had a spirit one time tell me, I can make baked Alaska, or I can make the most amazing dessert. I'm a desserty person. Mm-hmm. I can make the most amazing dessert but I don't eat it because it's an illusion. Right. So they miss food is what I hear. Mm-hmm. And food is a thing that nourishes the human body. So spirits don't need it.
Right.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. But they're around us all the time. Little children can see and talk to spirits because we all come in with the ability. And then about the age of 6-ish, 7-ish, we start to shut it down and not believe it because we're told, oh, honey, you don't really have an imaginary friend. You're just making that up. That's not real, because the adult can't see or perceive the imaginary friend, but the imaginary friend is very real. The child can perceive that spirit. It's just that the adult can't because they've shut down their intuitive ability. But also adults, we've all had situations where we think of somebody and we run into them, or they call us or they text us or they email us and we say, oh, what a coincidence. I was just thinking of you the other day, or I was just thinking of you this morning, and here you are. No coincidence. That's your psychic ability that you're picking up. And furthermore, gut instincts, women's intuition. Men have gut instincts, right? Women have intuition. And you think, this isn't the right thing to do, but it makes sense, so I'm going to do it anyways. Whenever we do that and we don't follow our guidance, our intuitive guidance, we usually regret it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, again, it's that thing, like you were saying, is it spirit giving me the answer? Sometimes it's hard for us to know what our gut instinct is, isn't it? Or what our rational mind is saying.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It's when we ask a question and it's the first response that comes in within a second. And you can do it with any spirit. It doesn't have to be somebody that you knew. You want to talk to Moses, you want to talk to Aristotle, you want to talk to whomever, it doesn't matter. You just think of, Picasso, you think of them, and then they immediately come in. In one of my classes, I teach people how to do this woo-woo stuff from all over the world. The only prerequisite is you got to speak English, because that's the only language I speak. And in one of my classes, there was a brilliant engineer who was working on some kind of algorithm or whatever, and he wanted to talk to Einstein. So we pulled in Einstein in the class, and Einstein gave him the information that he needed to solve whatever the equation was that he was working on. So you can do that with any spirit. We have access to universal intelligence by communicating with spirit, and everybody does it. They just don't realize it. It's just a matter of developing and enhancing it.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And I've been thinking about your medical intuitive skills, because you can do that with animals as well as humans. So do people come to you as more like a prevention, or people who already have ailments, or it's a combination?
More people that already have a situation going on. And oftentimes they've been to many doctors, and their symptoms are still the same. They're not getting better. They've had multiple treatment programs suggested and implemented, and they still have the same symptoms. So, Tara, I'm like a human MRI. I connect to somebody energetically, and then it's like I can see an X-ray or a CT scan or an MRI when I connect in with them. And I don't scan anybody without their permission, because I think that's unethical. So I turn my abilities on and off at will. My psychic abilities too. I don't walk around scanning for dead people. I mean, it's just, if I have something that gets my attention, I can turn my abilities on in a nanosecond. So I'm like a human MRI. A couple things happen. Number one, something's identified. Immediately thereafter, there's some type of energetic healing that will begin. And that can take the form of something getting added, something getting removed. I watch procedures all the time that emulate what I saw in surgery for decades. I'm an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world, some of which have been on the market for 30 years, and they're still being sold. Sometimes I see healings that utilize methodologies and devices that haven't been invented yet. And regardless of what I'm seeing in my mind's eye, I'm very descriptive with my client or my caller if somebody calls into my show and has a medical thing they want me to address. Because if we can envision what I'm describing to them, it's going to help integrate the healing into their body. And my analogies sometimes, Tara, are just hilarious. I may tell you a body part looks like a bowl of whipped cream or something crazy, but that's really how I see it in my mind's eye. And I've learned after all of these years that those visualizations come in a way that I can convey it to the person with whom I'm working, so that they understand the energetic healing that's happening within our human frame of reference. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing that I do is on a medical healing is I work on what's called the energy field membrane. And that's the container that holds the energy that makes up our body and our spirit. And it reminds me of really thin, stretchy plastic wrap, like in most of our kitchen drawers. And when there's a tear or a hole in that, it's allowing an energy leak. Energy leaks always precede any kind of medical condition, 100% of the time. And they're caused by an energy block. A la Eastern medicine, acupressure, acupuncture, clear the block, get the chi to move, that whole concept. Energy blocks in turn are caused by an emotional event.
Right.
Maybe something simple, like somebody called you a bad name when you were little, maybe something dramatic. Doesn't matter what it was. As soon as we illuminate it, it eradicates it. It allows the membrane to heal. The body goes back to working on full power, and it helps the person regain and maintain health. An analogy I like to use for this membrane to give us a human frame of reference is, if you think about going to the pet store and buying a goldfish, they're going to put it in a plastic bag of water. Mm-hmm. So if you have a picture of that in your mind's eye, the fish represents our body, the water represents our spirit, because the body's inside the spirit and the spirit's the power source for the body. And the plastic bag represents the energy field membrane. So if there's a pinhole in that plastic bag and water is draining out a drop at a time, for a long time, that fish is going to be just fine. However, when enough water drains out, that fish is going to be in trouble. And that's what happens to the human body. So we fix the energy field membrane, the body can work on full power. It helps the body heal and maintain health.
Wow, that is fantastic. I love the analogy. And it was making me also think about grief, how if we don't process our grief, it can become toxic. It can bring blocks inside of our body. You know, it's not just a mental, emotional thing. It can really be a physical thing too. So having some energy work from somebody like yourself to keep that energy field clear could be really helpful.
Well, and you're right on point on that, because grief causes stress. Stress causes cortisol, which causes inflammation, and inflammation is the root cause of most illnesses. You know, a lot of them anyways, heart disease, diabetes, you know, whatever, and even cancer. And it exacerbates whatever we're exposed to and kind of can put us on a trajectory of illness. So you're right. I completely agree with you on that.
I was also thinking about the current situation that we're in the pandemic. You know, it's hard not to talk about it. You know, we're coming into 2 years of this, and from your guides and messengers, your, you know, spiritual beliefs, like do you have some messages of hope for people around the situation that we're in?
Certainly, there are lots of good things that are happening as a result of this. It's how many times have we thought or heard somebody say, gosh, I wish I had time to read a book. Gosh, I wish I didn't have to drive in that traffic to work. And now they're working from home. Gosh, I wish I had more time with my family. The Zoom calls with doctors' offices. Well, that makes tons of sense. You don't have to be seen and sit in a waiting room for a half an hour or 3 hours waiting to be seen. Oftentimes things can be done electronically. The ability to just refocus. A lot of people are moving. They're moving out of a city perhaps that they lived in, and they're looking for a different place to live in, perhaps maybe a larger home in a different place where it's more affordable, because they're going to have an office in their home. Or they're going to work from home. And I think, too, it's important to remember for those of us that have experienced loss, we've had a loved one die in a hospital when we couldn't be with them, and we're agonizing over that they died alone. I'm here to tell you, nobody dies alone. We're all surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets. And I find that gives people a lot of comfort in knowing that. And then when we communicate with their loved one who's passed, they say the same thing. Because the other thing that I've heard since the beginning, and I truly believe too, Tara, is we all decide when we go, where we go, how we go, and who's with us or not when we go. So all forms of death are a form of suicide, really, if you think about it. If we're all deciding when and how and where and who's with us and what the circumstances are. And when we know that, it helps relieve our guilt and our angst and our grief over, oh, we weren't there when grandma died or somebody. And really, every funeral director has endless stories way before the pandemic of the family sat with Granny for 3 weeks, and then Aunt Susie was on duty and she left to go get a cup of tea, and she was out of the room for 3 minutes, and Granny slipped away when Aunt Susie was out of the room, and Aunt Susie's just mortified and so grief-stricken. Well, Granny wanted to leave while she was by herself. And so every funeral director has countless stories along those lines.
That's so true, you know, and I often wonder, is it also that the soul kind of feels that it's easier to go if energetically we're all holding on, back here. That was always an interpretation of my own.
Well, I think there's definitely something to that. And I know in my mother's case, she really was struggling at the end, and it was not pretty. Yeah. And I found out from a nurse friend that she probably could have been more well medicated by the hospice people that were working with her. And even so, I was the only one with her when she died. And I've often thought, I don't know that my family members would ever be able to lose that vision of her struggling at the end. They all arrived about 10 minutes after she passed, and she orchestrated that. I told her, I said, they're on the way. You do what you need to do. But she also knew that I could see her spirit and I could see her be carried off by angels, which is what happens to everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody goes to heaven. All dogs go to heaven. All people go to heaven too. I'm here to tell you.
And I really enjoyed what you said, that we kind of can't, we have a predestined time that we leave.
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe we have a predestined time. I believe we decide when we're leaving, because certainly there are many past life regressions and also near-death experiencers who will say, okay, my body died and I experienced all this spiritual stuff, and then I decided to come back. So it has not been my experience. And I know there are lots of schools of thought about we have a predestined time, date, whatever, circumstances, and that we also have little windows that we can slip through if we want to choose those. That's not been my experience. And it parallels with my belief and what I've experienced along the lines of our thoughts create our reality. So we don't come in with a roadmap of how our life is going to unfold. We choose where we're born, when we're born, to whom we're born, so our lives can have a basic trajectory that will allow us to explore something. But we don't necessarily say, okay, I'm going to live in London from this year to this year, and then I'm going to live in wherever from this year to this year, and here's what I'm going to do every day. That unfolds as we create it, because our thoughts create our reality.
That is very useful. I like that. Yeah.
The other thing along those lines is past lives. Past lives are so much fun when we do past lives. I don't do regressions. I do past life scans. Can I talk about that for a minute?
Yes.
May I talk about that for a minute? Past life scans.
Mm-hmm.
So when we come in, we have something that we want to explore. Like, let's say you want to be a teacher. Well, there are a bazillion ways you can be a teacher. You can be a parent, you can write a book, you can teach in a classroom, lots of different ages. You can teach via Zoom. It's endless, right? So we come in and we want to be a teacher. And one life, you're an author and you live in Lisbon and you're a man and all that stuff. Next lifetime, you come in and you're a teacher at a university and you're in India now, and you're teaching at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT, and you're teaching something else. Same basic script, looking at it and you're a woman when you're teaching at IIT. Same basic script, different perspective, different gender, different time, different culture, different language, all of that. So I'll see that there'll be kind of something that people want to explore that will repeat through multiple lifetimes, and they'll get a different viewpoint. An analogy I like to use for this, Tara, is think of Shakespeare's Hamlet. How many times has that play been performed since he wrote it in 1603? Who knows?
Yeah.
But certainly think about what was happening in the world at the time. What was the language? Where was it performed? Who were the actors? Who was the set designer? Who was the costumer? All of that. Same script, different perspective. And that's how I equate past lives with that. And I think that ties into us creating our life as we go with our thoughts.
And just before we finish, do you have any thoughts that you could give to people who are feeling like they don't want to be on the earthly plane anymore? They wish that they could be in spirit with their loved ones. Do you have any thoughts about that you could share?
Certainly, that they are in spirit with their loved ones. They can communicate with their loved ones at any time. And the bit about us living is our loved ones want us to live a life of joy. And when we can communicate with our loved ones, all you have to do is ask them a question or say something to them. They're going to respond instantly. It helps comfort us and then allows us to move on and experience and explore whatever it is we came in to experience and explore, including that deep grief and creating out of that. When we know what we don't want, it helps us create what we do want. And so, again, our thoughts create our reality, even in that situation. Our loved ones are joyful. They're in heaven. It doesn't get any better than that. Everything's amazing there, way beyond what we can comprehend in our human minds. And they're with us at the same time. Because you know how in the Bible talks about that we're made in the image and likeness of God? I think most of us think God looks like Dumbledore or Gandalf, old man, long white beard, long white hair, long white gown, whatever. But I believe that we're made in the image and likeness of God in spirit form. So if God can be everywhere and be with everybody all at the same time, and we're made in his image and likeness in spirit form, so can we. Yeah. When we're in spirit.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. And we are going to put a link. You're very, very generous.
I have a present.
Yes. Share about your gift, please.
All right. If anybody would like a copy of Angelic Attendants, or I have a new book that just came out, Angel Messages for Cats. I have 3 children's books, the Angel Message series. Look at these illustrations. They are so darling. And Angel Messages for Dogs and Angel Messages for Kids. Anybody that would like a gift and a free copy, all you have to do is just go to AskJulieRyan.com and the Ask Julie button, click on that and just say, hey, I heard you on Tara's show and I'd love a copy of your books, and we'll send you a free download of the digital and audiobook version. If you want the children's books, just say, I have kids or grandkids, or I'm a cat lover or a dog lover. I'd love a copy of that book too, and we'll be delighted to share them with you as a Happy New Year present.
Amazing. Thank you. That's so, so kind and generous. I really appreciate that. Julie, it's just been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Everything about me is at AskJulieRyan.com. The information about my classes, about calling into my show. People call in from all over the world. It's every Thursday night, and people schedule appointments with me privately too. I do that all day, every day, and it's a blast. I get to meet amazing people. So I'm delighted to help any way I can.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's been watching as well. Lots of love. Bye-bye.